Hello YouTube! I am Pinstar and this is Dwarf Fortress Strategy and Tactics Quick Tip. Today we're going to talk about the one tab we haven't touched on yet in the embarkation screen, and that is animals. What animals do we wish to bring with us? Which ones are worth the points and how many? What different strategies can we employ with these animals and what do they bring to the table? So as far as animals go, they are a fantastically diverse source of both food and also utility in terms of non-edible materials, but also just security utility for some of them. Allow me to explain. I'm gonna go through some of the best-in-class animals that you may want to consider. Some of them are not really worth it one way or the other. And also keep in mind, based on which civilization you're embarking from, the specific list of animals available to you may be slightly different depending on what animals that civilization has access to. But most of the ones that I recommend are pretty common, so it'd be rare to not have them on your list. All right, so we're going to start here at the top. Turkeys. Turkeys are a fantastic addition to your fort for a couple of different reasons. Turkeys, specifically turkey hens, lay eggs. They lay the most number of eggs out of all of the egg-laying animals, allowing your dwarves to get quite a few eggs used for cooking to help out your food supply, and each individual egg is, by itself, equivalent to a full meal. It's really, really efficient, and they lay a whole bunch of them at once, as long as all you really need to do is provide nest boxes, which you don't even need to embark with. You can make them at the carpenter's shop for a single log. So even if you don't want to pay the 10 points to get a nest box from day one, you can just build them a few nest boxes and go from there. There is a trick, and this goes for all of the different egg-laying species, is that if you want to make sure that those eggs actually hatch into more of that, one, you're going to need a male to fertilize them, but two, you're going to need to forbid the eggs in the nest so the dwarves don't touch them and they're given a chance to hatch. I'll show you how to do that towards the end of the video. The thing with turkeys is they are the only bird that will actually give you leather when you butcher them. So they come with quite a bit of meat and bones, but also leather. The only downside is that it takes them a while to grow compared to some of the other birds. So if you're looking for a fast turnaround for meat production, you may want to look elsewhere. But I think they're really good specifically for their superior number of eggs and whatnot. If you're going to take turkeys, all you really need is one hen and one gobbler, and let the hen's first couple of clutches hatch, and you'll have all the turkeys you could ever want. Up next we have dogs. And now you have the option for more points to come with pre-trained dogs, but it's easy enough to train the dogs yourself, so I usually go for the untrained variety, one female, one male. That way you get puppies and more dogs along the way. And early on, you only really need the two dogs. The main utility for dogs is one, to aid in fort defense, but two, they are sort of detectors. Your fort will occasionally be infiltrated by sneaky individuals like kobolds who won't appear on the map initially. You know, with your dwarves, they may sneak right past your dwarves, but dogs have a much keener sense. And if you train them into, say, war dogs, they can not only alert the dwarves of any thieves, but also help in the taking down of them. So dogs are useful in that sense, and hunting dogs in a pinch can be useful as well. I prefer the war dog training, but either way, two dogs, you'll get more puppies, more dogs, more useful. Next up, we have cats. Now, cats are useful, but you have to be careful with them. Here's the reason. Any other animal, you have the ability to label them as adoptable or not. And if you label them as adoptable, one of your dwarves can take them as a pet. Now, that makes that one dwarf happier, but also gives the potential for that one dwarf to get very upset if that animal dies. So you kind of, for animals that are bound to be butchered eventually, you obviously don't want to make them anybody's pets. Cats are different. Cats, you don't have control over them becoming pets or not. If a cat, it is the cat's decision, not yours, to become a pet or not. The cat actually adopts the dwarf, not vice versa. Now, that in of itself is not a problem, but if you have a bunch of cats running around the fort that have been adopted to dwarves, you're not going to be using cats for butchering, but if something happens in the forts and takes out a bunch of your cats, that can cause a tantrum spiral, as all of your dwarves suddenly lose their pet cats and go nuts over it. As such, I do recommend buying a cat because they are good for keeping by your stockpiles and hunting vermin to keep them away from your food. But I only bring one cat. I do not bring a breeding pair for specifically that reason. The next animal potentially worth bringing are sheep/ewes and rams. This is the Swiss Army knife of animals. You not only can get milk from them, but you can get wool from them. All for a pretty modest amount of grazing space needed. Each animal of this type needs about a 2x3 patch of grazing territory. I mean, you don't have to assign one animal to each individual patch, but make sure your grazing area is that big depending on how many you bring. One ram and a whole bunch of ewes will get you a lot of milk and a lot of wool, and also more sheep to further increase your flock. The one downside is that you do need to make sure you have grazing ground. There's usually plenty of ground above ground, assuming you're not embarking on a hostile biome, but soon that may become hostile over time as you have raiders and invaders that might do some harm to your flock. Once you breach the cavern layers, you can get grazing underground as mushrooms spawn and essentially become grazing quote-unquote grass, but in the underground layers where you can keep them a lot safer. Pigs are an interesting exception to many rules. They cost the same as sheep, however they do not provide wool. They do provide milk and also meat if you butcher them, but they don't require grazing ground at all. So you can bring them underground immediately and pen them in smaller spaces, and they don't need to, graze. How they gain their sustenance, that's not my problem, but it allows you to keep them underground immediately without worry about that, and you get plenty of ongoing milk and meat for your fort. Quite easy, quite simple, very effective to take if you are embarking in a hostile biome and you don't have a lot of grazing grass or any grazing grass on the surface. Goats are one of my favorite ones. They are like pigs, but much cheaper. They do require grazing, unlike pigs, but they do provide milk, lots of milk. It is crazy how much milk you get out of them because of how many nanny goats you can buy for the cost. You can embark with like 15 nanny goats, and not only will you have a constant supply of milk, but you'll also have a constant supply of more goats as long as you bring a billy goat. So tons and tons of above ground animals, tons and tons of food to be had. If you have the space up above ground, it's worth it to bring goats because of how cheap they are to embark with. Llamas. If you need to have a little bit of wool, and it's useful to have a little bit of wool in your fort, bring llamas. If you're not going all the way down the sheep track, bring just a single pair of llamas. Llamas have the superior amount of wool production compared to the other wool-bearing animals. They do need a bit bigger of a pasture, but they provide a lot more wool and also still provide milk as well. Llamas are going to what you want if you just need to make sure you have a token segment of wool coming out. And for Pete's sake, do not go with alpacas at all. Alpacas are inferior llamas that cost the same. They produce less wool. They are just overall, they still eat a ton, but they just give you back less. So X-nay on the alpacas, go for the llamas or the sheep if you're going for wool-bearing animals. Now let me show you just a few other tricks in-game so you can know how to set them up in case you're unfamiliar. Alright, first things first, if you have above ground grass, you do want to set up a pasture. In order to do so, click on this and go to pen/pasture. And again, this is where I was saying before, count the number of animals you need and make it big enough accordingly. You can assign multiple types of animals as well. And what you want to do is click on this icon and go through your list of animals to assign them here. Also, one other thing to note about animals. You're going to get 2 additional animals for free, randomly determined. We didn't buy or pay for stray buffalo, water buffalo, but we got them. You always have 2 of them. They're basically the animals that pulled the wagon to your starting spot, but now they're just yours to do with what you want. These animals tend to be much bigger. They tend to eat and graze a lot. I usually butcher them, honestly speaking. But for here, we're going to want to assign all of our sheep, since that's what we're embarking with, as well as our turkeys. They don't actually need to graze, but they do like to wander around. And one other thing, to get your turkey to lay eggs, you want to have a nest box. You can make that in any of your workshops. I happen to just embark with one for, brevity's sake. And to build one, you want to go to workshops, farming, nest box, and place the nest box somewhere in that area. As long as it's in the pasture and that pen is assigned to the nest box, they will eventually, when they're good and ready, go over to it and lay eggs. And there we go. We got turkey hen egg 12. Like I say, they lay a lot of eggs. Now, these eggs are up for grabs at this point by your dwarves, but if you want them to hatch into more turkeys, just click on the forbidden here. This will tell your dwarves they are off limits, leave them alone, and they'll get fertilized by the gobbler and hatch into more turkeys eventually. If you do want them to just be collected and eaten and cooked, then obviously just leave them like that. Once the nest is cleared out, the hen will lay some more eggs eventually. And such. And again, make sure you want to have an extra nest box based on the number of laying birds that you have. So build more nest box as needed. The other thing, as far as your other animals go, a farmer's workshop will be needed to both milk and shear them. So here, if you have animals that need to be sheared, they give you wool a little bit more often than once a year. So you want to start off by shearing them to start the timer to get more wool back again. Shear animal, repeat, and then spin thread will turn the sheared coats into thread, which can then be processed into yarn in a loom. And then once it's in yarn, you can make clothes and other materials out of it. And them spinning thread works exactly the same way as milking animals. They'll bring the animal over, shear them, and then once we have the spin thread job going, it takes them a little bit while, and now they get yarn and uses up the wool. So that is a little introduction onto bringing out the earliest of animals to help get your fort started and your economy and food engines humming nicely. So if you found this episode useful, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and leave me a comment, good, bad, or indifferent. Your feedback's always welcome. So until next time, it's been Pinstar signing out. See ya!